Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you for having me on your show and getting to meet all you people for the first time, and I appreciate it. I wrote The Many Faces of a Bully, Abuse, and Addiction, and a little bit about my background is I am also a licensed advanced clinical esthetician in skincare, where I have worked with doctors and worked on skin for a number of years. But before that time, and before that career change, I also worked in the social services field in treatment centers. I managed a group home for abused and addicted teens, as well as I took in a therapeutic foster child, and that means that that child had been in numerous homes in various situations. And on a side note, I traveled with a Christian theater group whereby I shared at the mic how I overcame my personal addiction and my life was transformed. So out of that, and in the book, I have 20 strategies for overcoming trauma, as well as 10 keys to forgiveness, because forgiveness plays a part in wholeness. And I know that the Lord wants to heal and restore all of his people.
Yeah.
Yeah. Awesome.
Yes.
That's loaded.
Yes. So much there.
It was work. But what prompted me to write the book was, at first I thought it was going to be about my extreme makeover, where I was actually bullied for being fat at one point in my life and called every fat-shaming name under the sun. And also, when I lost all the weight, I endured some thin shaming, which nobody really talks about, but that's actually a word, and you can Google it, thin shaming. And so, to deal with all of that, I thought I would write about it, and I thought that's not the whole subject. And it took bravery and some commitment to revisit a molestation and a rape from my youth. And what really encouraged me on this journey was all the untold stories from others now emerging and people finding their voice. And so I thought, maybe that is it. I wanted to leave my testimony out of the book, how I was delivered from a drug addiction. But what really cinched this was I sat in church Sunday after Sunday, month after month. We sat in the same row. I don't know if you ever do that, but sit in the same row at church, and here I am. And no one talked about their silent pain. And one day someone comes up to me and they go, shh, shh, don't tell anybody. I'm dealing with an addict. And please pray for me, they asked. So eventually, everyone in the row started talking about addiction in their family or a loved one or a relative or their spouse. And we all started talking amongst ourselves and praying for each other, and that's really why I wrote the book. Some people have never had to deal with addiction. They don't know what to look for, what the first stage is or what the last stage is, and I cover all that inside the book, The Many Faces of a Bully, Abuse, and Addiction. It was written for anyone dealing with that, or maybe they've been through that themselves. So a lot went into putting the book together.
Yeah, it's something about when you realize you're not alone in it. You know what I mean? You're not alone. Even though you were saying like you were kind of suffering in silence, so to speak.
Well, back in the day, children, at least where I grew up, children were to be seen and not heard.
True. Yeah.
So I was molested by a neighborhood serial pedophile who since then has passed away, and he did go to prison, but not on my account. He struck again. But I was molested by this pedophile, and I never talked about it. So by the time I was able to open up and talk about it, the laws were such back in the day that nothing could be done. And my parents at that point in time didn't believe in therapy, so there again, I never got to deal with it.
Right.
So through all that, my parents did try to take him to court and did try to press charges, and nothing could be done, and he got away with it. So, but not in the end. So out of all that, I started to self-soothe with food. My grandmother actually did a food intervention and changed my life. I had continued to put on weight year after year, like I had said, and She didn't want to see me get bullied and harassed in high school. She brought me under her wing one summer, and she took away all the food that I had been eating and changed my diet so I could enter the high school years. There was a brand new me on the outside, but inside I had never dealt with the deep-seated trauma. Yeah. What I learned was if you don't deal with it, it's going to come out in a different way. So I traded a food addiction where I used to hoard the food before that was even a word. And my grandma, like I said, staged the food intervention. So I used to hoard the food, and so I exchanged the food addiction for a drug addiction at that point in time to numb my pain. And that evolved over a period of years because I dealt with a rape. And then the biggest thing, one of the other big things, was 3 upperclassmates showed up at my house with a butcher knife in the suburbs. No one was home, all for saying hi to a guy that I was friends with in high school, nothing more, just friends with. But she started to like him, and this upperclassmate hated my guts. And I never dealt with hate and bullying on that level, and they call it mob bullying. And I talk about mob bullying in the book because that wasn't the only occasion that I dealt with a group of females. So how I got out of that situation is a true miracle, which I actually describe in the book, how I got away from 3 girls with a butcher knife. And it's a miracle because I was a backslidden, prodigal child that grew up in church. When the doors were open, our family was in church. And at that point, I know God did an intervention, and it was a miracle how I got away from these 3 girls, which I describe in the book. And I can't take any credit for how I survived 3 against 1 at my size, but I give all the glory to God. The police had the butcher knife, and I had begged my mom not to press charges because of the threats on my life at school.
Wow.
Wow.
I dealt with bullying on a level that I wanted to talk about it because so many people, whether it's in the church or in the school or businesses, people are dealing with this as an epidemic. Just like drugs, it's an epidemic proportions, the heroin that's out there today.
And you know, you said something that you were dealing with it, you know, I guess elementary, middle school, and never, even as an adult, you know, there's a lot of epidemic, like you said, of adults even dealing with it now. But what was your journey to realize I got to work from the inside out? I have to heal from the inside out. I have to deal with the actual root cause of what you were experiencing. I mean, as a person, not what they were doing to you, but what you were dealing with from the inside out. 2
things happened to deal with 2 different types of addiction. In high school, for the drug addiction, I got to the end of myself. I was sitting on the school property in a car with a group of people, and we were all getting stoned at lunch. And I was at a place where I actually hated myself. And I was taking it out on myself. I didn't like where my life was going. I didn't like how I was evolving. I didn't like what I saw in the future. And at that point in my mind's eye, I saw a black tunnel. And in the black tunnel, I saw myself spiraling out of control. And to me, it was death by drugs. And in the tunnel, I looked up. And God got me in that smoldering car full of people. I looked up in this vision in my head, and I saw a bright light shining down in darkness. And I said, that's the Lord. He came into my grave and pulled me out of it.
Oh, wow. Jesus.
And at that point in time, I was changed, totally transformed, got my life together, ran back to church where I had quit going, talked to the youth pastor, went back to school. Everything was doing good. And then I relapsed. And outside of that, I'm sharing it for all the parents that are dealing with children, family members, co-workers that are on heroin or other substances. And I relapsed, and during that time, I went back to that culture, and I endured a rape. And I dealt with that, and I ended up in the ER. So I lived through that process, and I'm in school, and at that point, I was still partying, and I went outside the building to vomit from partying the next day. And then I was between the bushes, and I almost heard the audible voice of God. He said, look what you're doing. Are you going to go back to everything that you just came out of, everything I rescued you from, everything you were delivered from? Are you going to go back to that lifestyle? From that day on, I never touched a drug ever again.
Thank you.
And I share that to impart hope. I never went back to that lifestyle. And I give all the glory to God that He came into my darkness and rescued me.
Wow.
I'm just a little overwhelmed at the fact that all of that happened to you before you graduated from high school.
I know, that's why it's in the book, and I couldn't talk about it. It wasn't until my mid-30s.
I guess I have a couple questions, but one of them is, was someone praying for you? Do you know, did anyone, after you got clean and came through all of that and God appeared to you and pulled you out of that darkness, did anyone come forward and say, I've been praying for you all this time?
I know that my grandmother's legacy and my parents' legacy played a part. They grew up in church, and I know that played a part. And I actually had a mentor in my life, and I don't think she's living any longer, but she took me under her wing after I got out of high school, and she mentored me. And then I went to a Christian college, and I've always adopted people along the way, mentors and life coaches or whatever, adopted people along the way that have played a part in my life.
I just think that gives so much hope to parents that are praying and grandparents that are praying for their relatives and people who are caught in addiction to don't give up. There's hope.
Yeah, some things happen outside of your control. You can't control everything. And for that, God's grace and His mercy, but He's into healing and restoring people, and I've just got to be a recipient of that. And for the other addiction, for the food addiction, I went to college, and they had an endless all-you-can-eat buffet, and I'm like, oh, let me at it. So I actually I went back to the food addiction and put on 30 pounds. My face breaks out in one massive zit. I go to the dermatologist, and he goes, what are you doing different? And I said, I changed my eating style. He goes, go back to eating clean and green. And within 30 days, my face cleared up. But then I continued to eat. Since then, I got married and I had 2 children. But with the second child, I changed my whole diet. I'm going to eat for 2. I'm going to eat whatever I want. I put 50 pounds on.
Wow.
Nothing fit my feet but thongs, flip-flops. And so I put 50 pounds on. I thought, oh, I'm going to lose it like I did the first time. Well, 5 years later, I wasn't exercising, and I didn't lose a pound, and I was morbidly, upset with myself. So I went back to eating clean and green and lost the weight. But out of those 2 things that converged and I had to deal with it, I never dealt with the deep-seated trauma, and it was manifesting itself in those ways. So I took some time out in my mid-30s to focus on becoming whole. And this is what I will say. I found a good Christian psychologist that dealt with sexual abuse. And on top of that, some churches were opening the door where they were having special speakers or a book co-host or workshops on how to overcome bad things happening and trauma happening to good people that love the Lord and our prodigal children that are out there, that God has an answer for them too.
I have a question. Do you ever see those people from high school?
I've been to a couple class reunions, but no, it's been a long time. I have not.
I just wonder what their lives turned out like,
Some of them I have found out over the years have died.
Okay.
Yeah, and some have been in car accidents and have died.
Wow.
And some have died of overdoses. That I do know. I've kind of followed some of it over the years, but not recently.
Yeah.
Wow.
So in writing the book, emotionally, how was that for you? And you said you had to go back and...
It was a journey. Because I have some training in theater, I had to put myself back in those shoes and try to relive it so I could get the raw emotion and the words.
Gotcha.
And so I did that, but after so many times of editing, I mean, I didn't live that way each time. I just kept editing.
Hey everyone, hope you enjoyed the video. To see more like this, be sure to hit the subscribe button below and get all the latest content from TCT Ministries. We'd love to pray alongside you for God's blessings in your life, so you can email your prayer requests to prayer@tct.tv or click the link below and submit your request at tct.tv. God bless you and thank you for watching.